from a family of 5. It was my father, my mother, my 2 siblings, and I was the oldest, and my father was a pastor who ran a thriving church where he was loved by his members. My mother was not all too involved in the church affair, but she was of great help to him, because after going through the problems that came with running a church, he always came back home to meet with the serene family, all thanks to my mom. I believe that if not for the peace and tranquility which the home offered, my father would not be successful in his church ministry. I was 16 years when I lost my mom. I still can't wrap my head around how it happened because it happened so fast. She was not sick, she did not complain of any form of discomfort, neither was she involved in any accident whatsoever. She was just getting my younger siblings ready for school one morning when she suddenly slumped, was rushed to the hospital where she was proclaimed dead, after just a few moments. The doctor attributed the case of her death to be low blood pressure. It never gave any signal, it just took my mother's life. The church showed us massive love when my mother passed on. Members took turns to come over to the house to help out with the chores and all. If not for their presence during those times, I wonder how we would have actually pulled through then, as my father practically continued running the church. After my mother was buried, everyone returned to their busyness and my dad was left with us. It soon became a serious problem for him to manage the home, the church, and the kids. He was much more invested in the church. It was clear that my siblings and I needed a mother figure in our life. But my father was not willing to move on so quickly, as it was less than a year since my mother passed away. I did observe something, though. Throughout the whole mourning period and beyond, most of the ladies in the church were flocking around my father, as they were subtly sending a message to him that they were available. Well, even if my father was not mourning, he's not one to be easily carried away by the theatrics which they were putting up. My siblings and I lived that way for the next 1 year, with our father barely present in our lives. It was not really his fault, though. He was our father, but he was equally a pastor, who had to present for his members, too. That's how it began, looking after my younger siblings. I tried being a mother and a father to them, even though I needed a mother and father myself. A few weeks after we had celebrated my mother's 1-year passing memorial, my father opened the door to Nora, someone who would almost wreck our family, his church, and his relationship with his kids. Nora was the choir leader in my father's church. She was energetic, while singing, and could light up the atmosphere. She had an outlook of piety that you would never imagine that beneath her facade was a jerk. That should be avoided. Nora came crying to my father in his office during one of his counseling days. She was allegedly planning to hurt herself. Nora claimed her fiancé, whom she engaged to be married to, had broken off with her because she would not have sex with him until after they were joined in marriage. My father sympathized with her, but if his gesture had ended in sympathy, then things would not have gotten worse. He was apparently pleased with the fact that she upheld the standard of no premarital sex that he preached. This endeared him to her. She soon began paying us visits at the house. Nora's presence in our house seemed to do us a lot of good. She would help clean the house up, prepare food for us, and help my younger siblings out with, well, their assignments and homework. She was the mother figure we so needed since, and we soon began anticipating her arrival every day. Everything was getting back to normal, just like when my mother was alive. It wasn't long before rumors began flying around in the church that my father, who was their pastor, was courting Nora. Well, the rumors soon did become true, as my father saw the ideal replacement to his wife, and Nora. He proposed to her and she said yes, practically screamed it. The church was glad when my father announced that he and Nora were getting married. They'd been suggesting to him all along, and he did so as he was still young, and had children to take care of. But a few individuals approached my father with the claim that Nora was no good for him. They said she slept around. My father outrightly rebuked them. He felt that they were just slandering her name. He was almost certain that she was not what they were saying she was, because she had upheld her stand to not sleep with the men to whom she was engaged to, even when it meant he was going to call off the wedding. My father called Nora to confirm the accusations, and she debunked them. My father went on to get married to Nora, and my siblings and I were the happiest we've ever been. It meant that Nora was no longer going to be a visitor. She would not have to come and go every few days. She was going to move in with us permanently. We felt that she would make the best stepmother ever. Getting married to my father meant that Nora had somewhat of an elevated status. As expected, the members of the church, according to her, much respect. Because she was not just the choir mistress anymore, oh no. She was now the pastor's wife. She even got a parking lot space. The first few months were like heaven, but it soon dawned on us that the angel we thought we was actually having was a devil in disguise. All the while, when Nora was flaunting herself in the bid to seduce my father to marry her, she exhibited the very same traits which my mother did, which was supporting my father from the background by making the home conducive for him, and letting him handle the matters of the church. But after the marriage, Nora became the direct opposite. She was everywhere. She wanted to run the home and church, and she began abusing her position as the pastor's wife to meddle in people's personal affairs. People in church soon began complaining about her attitude, but Dad was somewhat reluctant to do anything about it. I guess he was trying to be patient with his newly wedded wife. Nora's attitude, which my dad failed to correct, began making the church lose members. She soon carried that same attitude over into the house. As a matter of fact, she became hostile towards my siblings and I, and while they wondered at her sudden change of disposition towards us, I knew the reason. Nora had made sexual advances towards me. Yeah, you got that right. I had to turn her down, as I could not sleep with my father's wife, who was absolutely like a mother to me. It amazes me that she had no shame whatsoever to attempt to abuse her stepson, who was a minor at the time. Well guys, I didn't tell father though. If the complaints which the church members made fell on deaf ears, what was the guarantee that he would take me seriously? Besides, Nora threatened me. Her hostility towards my siblings and I began affecting us super negatively. We no longer looked forward to coming home when the school hours were over, as the school had become much more conducive for us than our house. My father, on the other hand, soon stopped seeing the home as a safe haven. He would return to meet Nora and complain about something trivial, which she overlooked when they weren't married. My father kept quiet about all this. He did not reprove or rebuke his wife publicly or before us. Things soon got so bad in the church to the point that my dad had to talk to his wife. He did so, and that's when he saw the same part of her we were seeing. She reacted with hostility, started depriving him of his needs, and the relationship started going sour. My father did his best to hide what he was passing through from his children and the church, but the whole thing was telling on him. It was clear that he was not himself, or rather, he was not satisfied with how the way things were. People were literally leaving the church in droves, and when he paid them visits to encourage them to come back, they declined because of his wife, Nora. The members were running around from the church because of the pastor's wife, and that's just a shame. The angel, who he so adored, was becoming an unbearable pain in the side. There were suggestions here and there that he should send her away, but my dad insisted on playing by the holy book. He said that the oath which he took his marriage and to Nora, it's a lifetime affair that was only to be broken by death. It's a good thing, though, that he did not die in their reunion. My father had no other option than to try appeasing his wife, since he said divorce was against his belief as a pastor. It was around the time that she got pregnant, but her pregnancy aggravated the whole thing, and she was just on our necks. I was about to round up high school, and so when the whole place became heated, I ran away from home with my siblings for 2 full days. We just wandered about the street. It was better than sharing the same house, our father's house, with that monster by the name of Nora. Ugh, Nora the Conqueror. My father reported the case of missing children at the police station. And because he was popular, it was not really difficult spotting the pastor's children walking aimlessly around the streets like beggars. We were picked up and taken to the cops, to the station. And we were interrogated to know the reason behind us running away. Well, we spoke to the cops that we were being maltreated by our stepmom at home. They called in my father to come to the station. My father felt bad hearing us rehearse all what we had to tell the cops, and he pleaded with the cops that it was not going to repeat itself again. If it were someone else, my siblings and I would have been taken away from my parents, and probably sent to a foster home. But because of my father's influence, the cops released us to him. We got home that day, and my father confronted his wife, Nora the Conqueror. It was clear from her nonchalant attitude while we went missing that she loved the fact that we left. She wished that we'd stayed gone, actually. Nora and my dad had a heated argument that day and my father almost hit her. I could swear that was the first time my father was attempting to strike a woman in his entire life. Throughout the time when my mother was alive, we never heard my father argue with my mother. It was obvious that Nora, the Conqueror, was turning my father into something else. Only a monster could make a disciplined pastor lose his calm and attempt to hit a woman. Nora left home that night to report my father to the police. The idea was to create a scene that would be so embarrassing to my father, since he was a known preacher in the community. The police dismissed the case that Nora had reported as domestic violence, as my father did not lay hands on her. They only argued, and Nora, however, created a scene at the police station when my father was called upon. She wanted to start a fight with him right then and there, and people soon gathered in a circle. The news that well-known, refined, and disciplined pastor was fighting with his wife at the police station spread like absolute wildfire. My father carried Nora home and apologized to her for losing his calm and almost hitting her. I could not understand why my father was the one who offered an apology. Nora had pushed him to the limit and provoked him, but he responded by offering an apology anyways. He could have easily divorced her after that on the grounds of irreconcilable differences, but he still held on to the principle of, till death do us part. He even went further to offer a public apology to his entire church. Things went on quietly for a while with my father trying to please his wife, who was nursing pregnancy, but her hostility towards us soon resumed. My father became disturbed and questioned my siblings and I on what we could have possibly done to make Nora despise us so much, to the point of wanting to kick us out of his own home. I opened up to Dad, told him that she made sexual advances at me just a few weeks after they got wedded, and my refusal was what prompted her to become so hostile. Well, my father was mad. He had a hard time processing it. He was angry, but did not react immediately. He warned me not to let my stepmom know that he was aware. My father sent my siblings and I to go live with his mother till his wife was put to bed. Nora was glad when my siblings and I were, quote, pushed out of the house. She never knew that my father was up to something. He wanted her to give birth so that he could run a DNA test on the child to ascertain its paternity. If his wife, whom he'd initially thought was an angel, could attempt sexual abuse on her stepson, then there's no telling what she could do with people unrelated to her. 9 months finally came and Nora put birth to twin boys. My father liaised on with the doctor who was family friend and a DNA test was carried out. The 2 boys, well, they were not fathered by Dad. My dad absolutely lost his cool. It was then that he decided to take action. Nora and her 2 sons were still at the hospital when my father served her divorce papers. He was breaking his till the death do us part principle. Nora, the conqueror, was shocked that she'd not seen any fights with my dad to warrant being served divorce papers. But when she looked at the reason for the divorce, she had answers. My father was divorcing her on grounds of infidelity and attempted abuse of a minor. It dawned on her now that my father must have been informed about her advances towards me. She tried denying being unfaithful to him, but he presented her with DNA evidence results, which showed that both sons were actually fathered by another man. My father abandoned her and the kids right there at the hospital and cleared the bills. He came down to pick us up from our mother's place and back to his house, but he was not yet done with Nora. Oh, no. He charged her to court for attempted abuse of her stepson, who was a minor. I guess reality came and hit Nora like a ton of bricks, that she's now facing spending a lot of time in prison. She began showing up at the house to beg my father to drop the charges. My father wasn't willing to do so, and he wanted to put her behind bars to teach her a lesson, and equally send a message to his members, who had deserted, and were planning to desert the church, that his wife, who was the cause of all the problems, would no longer be around. My father continued the whole process, and Nora, she was finally sentenced after some lengthy time. 6 years, federal penitentiary, and her kids were taken away from her and sent to an orphanage. My father was not willing to train the children of another man, who I suspect might even be a member of his church. We're currently living alone with our dad in peace. He put the whole remarry thing on pause because he could not vouch for any woman, as Nora had taught him that even the devil goes to church, okay? So this was the #1 comment of the story. It drops a little bit of insightfulness. It doesn't really talk about the story much, but it does say this: wow, talk about a roller coaster of emotions. The story just gives me chills and makes me appreciate the importance of family and loved ones in our lives, and it makes me think about mine. The tragic loss of the mother, of the subsequent struggles of their father to balance his responsibilities as a pastor and father are heart-wrenching to say the least. But what really gets me is the revelation of the monster behind the mask we know as Nora. Nora, how deceiving can people be? And how much can one person affect the lives of an entire family and community is the question I have for you. The story was powerful, and thank you for sharing. It's a reminder of the importance of being vigilant and not blindly trusting others.